What's up, nerds? Welcome back. Happy National Read a Book Day, and in celebration, let's read a book that I've actually read several times now and that I've talked about several times, Stud and the Bloodblade, number one. All right, so like I said, I have talked about this book before because I actually got to do a review of the book before, or like a preview really, of the book before it actually came out in print because the writer did send it to me to kind of like do my own little review of it and just kind of offer my thoughts, which was really cool, and thank you for that, Perry. But I did want to actually do a full review of the book when it actually came out, so that's what I'm here doing today, now that I can actually hold the book in my hands, and that's just there's nothing that compares. Like I said, I've already read the story digitally, but just holding the book in your hands, like there's never anything that's better. So anyway, let's kind of get into it. So we start out with this. There's a crashed spaceship, and we're introduced to this character. His name is Astro. And so he's the one who's going to be saved by Stud in just a few minutes from this team. So they're made up of basically they're all kind of like puns in their own way. So we have Roach Coach, then we have Lava Voom, Rockstar, then we have in the front Can of Peaches, and then Roswell, and then Sassy Q. So Sasquatch, Sassy Q. Get it? So they're here basically to get what they believe is inside of the ship, which they're calling what, the demon's egg? Yeah, the demon egg. And so they're going to go and get that. And so as they're doing that, Astro is also kind of like looking around. And he realizes, okay, like this a place appears to have breathable air, so I might be okay for the time being. But right at that moment, Sassy Q like sneaks up on him. How? I'm not entirely certain because she is that big. But anyway, she sneaks up on him. He's almost gonna get away, but then Rockstar pops up and like gets him from the ground. So that causes him to trip, or not really to trip, but they're able to like capture him and everything. And then Roswell comes in for the killing blow, but before he can actually do it, he actually gets chopped in half by Stud himself. And this is the first time we actually get introduced to Stud in all of his glory. Like, I just love this design. He does look really cool. And the design of the axe too, like, where really it's the blood blade, but it looks more like an axe to me. I don't know, I'm conflicted. I love the design of it. It's so unique. But so we see that, and he says, my roughness is most necessary thanks to your fiendish master. And so we're going to find out a little bit more about their master in a little bit. But so he goes on attacking the rest of the team. So he kills Rockstar next because he's the one holding on to Astro. And then he goes after Lava Voom because she's also, trying to put up a resistance. But he manages to like cut her in half. And then he does the same thing to Can of Peaches. But then he's like kneeling down and he's like, ugh, it's just nothing but peaches. So, and that's the problem because the blade actually needs blood. So it's not until he goes and he kills Sassy Q that finally he gets some actual blood inside of the blade. So he's like, all right, good. That should buy me some more time. What is it? That should buy me a few hours. So Roach Coach takes off running, and then he uses his clipboard to stop the blade and like get away. So this is where Astro is introduced to Stud. He says, "Thank you. I thought I was about to get hogpiled by the collective unconscious." And Stud says, "How mean you?" As his faithful armadillo companion, that's his mount, comes running up, and I love that. As someone I've grown up in Texas, so I've seen lots of armadillo in my life. Like, just seeing him riding on an armadillo, I don't know why, but that makes me so happy. Anyway, so Astro's telling him about like the different monsters they just fought. He says, the alien, Bigfoot, demons, these are stories my people tell. Stud says, yes, stories, myths, dreams, all emerged from the Eidolon Sea to walk this land. He says, and this land is, so he tells him, Ouroboros, where time itself loops back around. When our sun, Omega Alpha, completes its dance, the universe begins anew. So Astro says, I know end times. My planet was dying, so we set off to scout for a new home. Now my crew is dead. And Stud is telling him, wherever you came from, you are safe here now, and safe. You are here now and safe, for I am Stud, protector of Ouroboros. So this is where he finally tells him, my name is Ben Astrozino, Astro for short. So he's like, oh, an astronaut named Astro. Perhaps Ouroboros is just where you are meant to be. So that does kind of fit, doesn't it? So he says, I'll take you to Prime, finest of cities. There you will find any help you need. So That's where they keep going, and then we kind of cut back over to where Roach Coach is kind of filling in his witch Tress. That's her name. That he's filling her in on basically what happened as he's kind of like getting the dead bodies together, and she really doesn't care that everybody's dead. She's like, I just need you to get the demon egg. So he's like, okay, okay, I'll look again. But first, tell me, Stud said you made him kill the others. What did he mean? She says, just bring me that egg and your friends' deaths won't have been in vain. Fail and you'll join them. So she just like poofs away. And then we see where Lava Voom is like still alive, just in a more like liquefied form, I guess. So he says, like, you're alive. She's like, barely. He says, we're the only ones left. Stud sacked us good. She's like, please, no more sports talk, or I'll wish he finished the job. So he's like, there's that fire in the belly. I say we call an audible and get revenge on Stud. Can you walk? And she's like, I don't have legs. So he says, then it's time for a quarterback sneak. And then that's where we come back over to Stud and Astro as they show up to this like tavern where he's also going to have lodgings for the night and everything. So they walk in and everybody knows Stud, so they greet him like he's walking in as if this is Cheers, and they're like, Stud! You can just imagine everybody like, Norm! So he's walking in and they're like, welcome, my friend, please, your food and drink are free. He's like, thank you, Jono, but I require only a room for my friend. So Astro asks him if he's leaving. He says, yes, a hero's quest is never ending. In fact, monsters are most active at night. So he's thinking to himself, that's right, hero, blame the monsters. But Astro tells him, I've learned a lot about monsters recently. Our mission encountered an unknown species. And this is where you kind of like, we get the flashback to where basically their crew was attacked and they lost some of their crew members, but they barely managed to get away. And then, well, now all the rest of them are dead because of the crash, and now it's just Astro. So he says, and now this place is swarming with monsters. So Stud tells him, like, come now, these are good people. And Astro tells him, I hate to sound so provincial, but where I'm from, people don't look like that. So he says, we actually thought we were alone in the universe. Now I've seen evidence to the contrary, and it's all tried to kill me, except you. He says, I will join you for one flagon of ale, to show you have nothing to fear from these Ouroboreans. So that's where we see he sits down and they kind of like start drinking. And at first, he's kind of wanting to know more about him, but he kind of tells him, like, I don't really tell stories about myself. So everybody comes up and they all have stories they want to tell about Stud, about like all these different things that he's doing or that he's done. And so we see them kind of like getting closer, and we can see Astro kind of like becoming more and more enamored with him. And that is leading us to a very inevitable thing here where we see them kind of like talking, and Astro is telling him like, oh, come on, if these people who are solid, by the way, you were right, want to buy you a beer, let them, because again, Stud is trying to leave. He's like, yes, they are good people. I only hope to deserve their acclaim. He's like, deserve their acclaim? Buddy, you are the thin blue line keeping this place from going full on inferno. So he says, speaking of which, work to be done. And he's like, I should be dead several times over. Instead, I've met a bona fide hero. Let's just celebrate the fact I'm still alive and you're awesome. So yes, they do end up sleeping together. And see, this is done very quickly. Like, we see the enamor, and then we see them, yes, they obviously hooked up, as we can see. And then that's it, right? But then this was the other part that I was like, okay, because now in modern comics, whenever you see a gay couple, you have to kind of wonder, okay, where's the rest of this story going to go? And what happens next, I did not see coming. So he's kind of waking up and he sees the blade kind of like glowing, and then you see this like whoosh thing that happens in this very last panel, so that we don't really see what exactly that is just yet, because all of a sudden Roach Coach comes in and he's holding Lava Voom's head, and she's kind of like balancing on Rockstar's half a head. So it just looks funny. But anyway, he comes in, he's like singing, are you ready for some payback? So he goes to like wake up Stud, but when he turns around, he sees this guy's in the bed instead. So we see this from Astro, which we don't often see as much from the gay characters. I mean, kinda, but they tend to be a lot more girly. Like, this is just Astro goes straight into action. Like, he doesn't whimper, he doesn't cower, he doesn't try and run away. He immediately just says, because Roach Coach asks him, where's Stud? He immediately says, I don't know, but you still got to deal with me. And he just like picks up the blade and tries to fight. And so he throws Lava Voom at him, but he splats her out of the way. So like I said, he's actually kind of holding his own for a second. But then Roach Coach comes up and he's like, yeah, you're in what? Yeah, this is the big leagues. So then he uses the blade to actually stab him. And which, if you will remember, this is the blood blade. So now that it has had some blood, we see the guy who was on the bed. Now he's in the gem, and Stud is back out. Because that's how it works. Basically, they swap places once the blade has blood, and that allows Stud to be out among people. So he immediately goes up and just punches Roach Coach's head off, and then he goes and he's kind of like comforting Astro and kind of telling him, like, you know, that guy that you saw, he was me, like I was here the whole time. And so Astro's telling him, but that scrawny guy, he says, that was Gary, and Gary was me for a time. So he says, the day's kills offered rock, dust, peaches, not the blood my weapon most craves, and has now taken from you. So that's where we see Astro dies, and he says, I should not have lingered tonight. I am so sorry. And he's just like, God damn you, Gary. And then we get this actually funny like flashback to where we see how Gary ended up with all of this going on, where he was a kid that Stud was talking to, and he told him, so you'd be a hero like me, eh? Can you wield a blade? And he's all like, come on now, lift it. And then we see Gary finally lifted it, and it just literally cut his own head in half. So I mean, I can't lie, I like, obviously that's a tragic thing, but it's hilarious when you really look at, because if you just imagine, he's just like, I don't know, it made me laugh. So that's where we see his mother, Witchtress. That was where she freaked out, and then she bestowed this curse upon Stud. She says, you mocked the son for whom I grieve, so the life you've taken shall be yours to lead, if ever you fail to feed your blade with the bloody mess that is your trade. So she puts that curse on him, and then we come back to Stud, and he's kind of like thinking it over. But then all of a sudden, from behind him, someone says, like, how did you get in here? So he turns around, and it's that same little pig guy that was like telling stories about him before. And he's like, I was already here. And he's like, what? He's like, oh, my Stud, what an honor to meet you. And he's like, meet me. We met last night in the dining hall. You spoke of Pundars. He's like, last night I arrived late and went straight to bed. So this is where Stud realizes, like, oh, wait a minute. Time has reset. Like, this is actually yesterday. So for whatever reason, he's thinking, this is a gift from Omega Alpha. I have another chance to like try and save Astro. So he immediately like jumps out of the window and jumps onto his armadillo and takes off and says he's not going to fail, because we can see the ship is like falling out of the sky again. So that's where we actually leave off. And this, because this is a double-sized issue, we actually get the next part of the story where we kind of get some more backstory on what actually happened with Witchtress in her past, because this is actually a dream that she's having. So it's like, sister, this is quite a home you've made for yourself. So that her sister is saying, oh, I have not made it. This is all the king's doing. You really are enamored of him to have given up so much, Witchtress tells her sister. And she says, he is a great man. She's like, still just a man, and men are so easily shattered. But her sister says, Grant's murder by monster broke all our hearts. So Witchtress has Gary running up to him, or running up to her. And she says, at least he gave me a son. Men are good for that. So we can see that she's very much close to him, like I said. And then we see where her sister, her husband, the king, his name is Crony, his new plan to protect the planet is Stud. And then that's where we see Witchtress looking the way that we see her the rest of the series. She's like, no, get away from my boy. And that's where she finally like wakes up yelling her son's name. And then she says, Ouroboros' champion, in quotes, Stud, is a beast fit only for the Badlands, but Crony loosed him right in the royal hall, and now my son is dead. And we can kind of see like where her bedroom is. And I just gotta say, I really love like the design of all of this. Like, her design really kind of gives me the vibe of the like the Wicked Witch of the West, obviously from Wizard of Oz, but just somehow even more evil. I don't even know. I didn't think that was a possible thing, because that bitch was pretty evil. But somehow this one seems both evil and somewhat sympathetic, almost, because yeah, it is the, she cares a lot for her son, but then she also just, it was an accident. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. It's like, okay, lady, I get it, but you're kind of mad about the wrong thing. Like, maybe your son shouldn't have been picking up a sword, yes, but still, like, it was an accident. Anyway, So she has these like talking dentures or whatever the hell that are talking to her, and it says, a great power has entered Ouroboros, enough to turn the tide, enough to slay the mighty stud. To which she says, where can I find this power? It says, even now it falls from the sky, through the sphincter of Omega Alpha, the egg of the Demon King. So she's like, with its power, I'll wipe the universe clean of hypocrites like Crony and his abomination Stud. So then we see the outside of her house, which I love even more than the inside. Just like this vintage, like gothic, like Victorian type of design to houses, which fell out of style by like the 50s in our country, but I love it so much. I want to live in a house like this someday, which I think just about anyone who's ever been like goth at any point in their life. Not that I was goth for very long. It was a very brief period in time. I've been metal much longer than anything else. But I've always wanted to live in a house like this. Like this exact house, colors and everything. I would love to live in this house. Anyway, so she comes out and she's like assembling the team and everything as they're like playing games and just kind of goofing around. But she points out the falling spaceship to them and tells them she needs the egg of the Demon King and that they need to go and get it for her. So we cut back over to Stud, who's riding on Dillo, and he's saying, like, Omega Alpha has graced us with a second chance to save Astro. Let's not waste it. So he's thinking to himself, ah, poor Dillo, trying his hardest, but he's just not built for speed. Time for another approach. So he does this, like, screech or whatever into the sky, and then we see this person coming for him. And so it's his other friend, Egal. So I thought that was pretty clever, I'm not gonna lie. When I saw it was Egal, I was like, okay, that was pretty clever. So she comes in, she swoops in to like help him out or whatever. And she's flying after him and is saying like, I don't think I'm actually going to be able to catch up to it. So she says, I'd love to see that, but the ship is too fast to overtake. Sorry. He says, you'll come in handy yet. And then he goes to do this thing, which was actually kind of funny. He goes to like flip himself over her, but he kind of like miscalculates and kind of like goes full crotch first into her face. So he manages to like get over. He's like, oh, my apologies. And so he says, when I tell you to activate your turbo or whatever. And so right at that moment, he says 1, 2, 3, and she does it. And then he like springboards off of her and like kind of causes her to go careening in the other direction. So it manages to do exactly what he needed it to, because he manages to land on the ship, as we see from Bam or whatever. And so he starts cutting his way inside, and he introduces himself to tell them like, yeah, I'm here to save you and everything. But they're like, yo, you just cut a hole in our ship, like that's not going to help us. He's like, well, yeah, but I had to get inside. And then they say, sir, we are the crew of the Earth ship Bonobo. Kindly leave our pilot to do his job. And he's like, nonsense. These controls look quite similar to those of my wing shot. So he goes in to like try and help out, but when he tries to help out, he pulls out the controls. And he's like, oh yeah, maybe the one, that's right, the one that was built for me was built, for my exact strength specifications. So we see that they continue to like careen out of the sky, but before they can actually crash, this time they get saved by these like plants that come up and basically like catch them. And so we can even see this like thought bubble in the middle panel where we see it's basically Stud thinking to himself, Flora. So because he basically knows who it is that just saved them. But now that they've come to a stop, he says, oh, okay, is Astro here? And they're like, you mean Ben Astro Zeno? Yeah, he's in the back in the sick bay. So he goes back there. He's like, okay, I have to go tell him that, now we have our second chance and everything. We can be happy together. So he walks in. He busts open the door. He says, Astro. And then we see Astro standing here with this woman. And he's like, oh, hello. Who are you? To which he's like, I'm Stud. I saved you. He says, oh, thank you, Stud. I'm Ben. And this is my wife, Noya. So she's like, we were afraid we weren't going to make it. And then that's where we see Stud is down here like, wife? How am I going to explain the night we had last night then? So this is where I talked about in like my previous video, a video about this particular comic, where I was like, I did not see first the whole thing about like Astro and Stud hooking up. I didn't see that coming at first. And then I was like, okay, so Stud is gay, I'm assuming, and so is Astro. Or at the very least, one of them is bi, right? So I was fine with that. And then to see this that confirmed that Astro is actually bi. But not only that, he had a wife prior to him hooking up with Stud. So I was like, okay, Well, yeah. So then, yeah, Astro is bi. I'm assuming. I don't know if Stud is. We haven't had any confirmation on that. As of right now, he could just be gay. But I mean, we do have confirmation now that Astro is bisexual, and so that's what I'm saying. Like, that's kind of how you do it. That's how you actually have a character revealed as bisexual. I'm not saying all characters have to be revealed as bisexual like this, but at least there's no room for like for any ambiguity there, right? Like the whole Tim Drake thing, the arguments people have put forth are not good. And so this right here, this is what I'm saying. Like this was an actual surprise. This was how you introduce like a romantic element into the plot and still make it interesting and not just like a romance story. You know what I mean? Because now there's an actual complication to this. And like he said, how do I explain to him how I actually know who he is and everything? So he says to him, "You have made it, but we must move quickly." So they go to like get out of the ship, and then this is where they're like walking out and they're realizing, okay, yeah, we can breathe here, we're okay. And then they find out who saved them. And again, Stud, yeah, he does know who it is. He introduces them to, was it Flora Borealis is her full name. So he's saying like, yeah, I figured it was you who saved us and everything. But before they can go any further with that conversation, all of a sudden the other team shows up and they just cut straight through Flora's face. So again, we see where they start fighting with them, and so Stud starts, of course, fighting against them. But then we have, I think, Flora comes in and she has her Flutter guys come and save them, which are these like fairy pixie looking type of things, but they're not like, you know how fairies and pixies are normally girls. Well, these are all, since they're called Flutter guys, yes, they're all guys. So they come in and they're trying to like help the astronauts kind of like get away and everything. So they're managing to do that while Stud is like holding everybody off. But then they actually start kind of like killing them. I think, right, they got one. Can of Peaches manages to get one with these ridiculous, like, what are they, like, forceps or whatever these stupid things are. So he's coming at him with that. And then we see where Egal, like, stops him and everything. And then Stud continues to fight. And then we actually get, this was actually pretty nice. The way that he kills Roswell this time, where he, like, throws the blade and it kind of does this, like, spiral motion. And then it kind of, like, cuts him into three pieces. That was really nice. Like, I liked that. So we get that, but then when Noya, Astro's wife, is about to be saved, all of a sudden Rockstar is like, yeah, I got her. And he just comes up and cuts her in half. So, of course, Astro is like, holy shit, Noya. And then we see, yeah, she's obviously pretty much dead. So, at that moment, Stud comes up and, like, kicks him and rips his arms off and everything as Astro is kind of, like, mourning her death. So Egal comes and says, the rest are clear. I can take you and your sick friend to join them. And Astro says, I can't just leave my wife out here like this. So Stud is telling him, like, I will bring her remains to Prime and you can say a proper farewell, but you must leave now. So Astro tells him to swear it and everything. He says, I do, as protector of Ouroboros. And Egal says, maybe don't lean on the protector bit right now, which, yeah, you kind of didn't save her, so maybe don't focus on the protector part. So anyway, we see Roach Coach comes up and he says, let's see how tough you are without your trick play sword. And Stud just tells him, I've bested worse than you with my bare hands, Roach Coach. And now I'll dispatch you with no hands at all, because Dillo comes rolling up and just smashes him. So we see that was the end of them. And then we see this thing where basically Flora comes and she's kind of like comforting Stud and kind of like trying to give him some advice. She says, you fought hard to save those people, Stud, yet I sense a sadness within you, and not for the one life lost. So he tells her, no, it is more complicated than that. I feel Omega Alpha duped me. To what end, I know not. And she says, few understand cosmic logic, even an ancient such as I. Trouble your mind no further. And this is where she like gives him a fruit or whatever to kind of like eat. And then she kind of invites him into herself. So we'll just kind of not focus on so much on the imagery there. You can kind of guess. But anyway, so he enters in, and then we see this kind of like flashback sequence where she says, when first you came to me, you were so small and innocent, and I sought only to protect you. But you needed no protection. And this is where we see how he got his like outfit or whatever, where he killed this snake, and basically that's where he made his outfit. But he also used to kind of have like this vest that kind of just turned into like his like belt or sash thing, I guess, whatever. So we see that, and then where he was growing up and everything, kind of like becoming more of the hero that he is. And it says, yes, but the wrong always returned because he always kind of tried to right wrongs. And it says, you helped so many. You gave hope to the hopeless. A noble calling. He says, no, my calling came later, to serve a higher purpose. To not merely beat back a relentless tide, but to achieve. And so she says, oh, my boy, the king heard of your great feats and came with designs of his own. So he says, yes, the designs of a grand mind, far superior to the walnut between my ears. He gave me the tool to finally cut myself free from this maddening carousel. So she says, you're doing someone else's dirty work, and it has made you filthy. He just tells her, Crony has given me purpose. What have you ever given me? Rotten fruit? So she says, fermented. And he's like, huh? She says, the fruit is fermented, intended to calm a storm that has already claimed too many lives. So he gets up to leave. And he's like, I've rested long enough. I need to retrieve my blade. And she just says, no, the stench of curse is strong on that weapon. It's made you something you're not. So he's just trying to tell her, no, I need it. Without it, I am pathetic. And she says, you are only pathetic when you let others manipulate you. And then she's like, oh, suddenly I feel stricken, nauseous. And he says, Flora, no, the blade's thirst consumes me. But this is where we can see from the outside that it's actually Witchtress. She's actually killing Flora, like, from the outside. She says, I can hear you skittering around under there, stud. Come out and introduce me to the Demon King. Then die. And then this is where we see Gary coming out. Because if you remember, if he hasn't had blood feed the blade for a while, he turns back into Gary. So this is where we see he's turned back in, and that's who's coming out of, like, Flora or whatever. But that's where we leave off on this issue, and I just, like I said, I've read this story several times now because I love it so much. And now that I actually have the physical book, I'm even more happy to actually own it. And for one thing, I do have to say, I don't know exactly what type of paper this is, but I love it. I mean, granted, here you can't really tell because I'm still getting glare from my lights. But when I was reading this book, unlike a lot of the books that I get from DC and Marvel, like, I could actually just leave this book lying flat on my counter and I could just turn the pages and read it. And I didn't really have to worry about the glare. Like, the only thing that ever really caught the glare was the actual, like, inks, like outlines and stuff. That was the only thing that ever actually caught the glare. Other than that, there was no glare. So I really loved whatever quality of paper this was. I'm going to need all the comics in this because this was just perfectly done. But yeah, like I said, I don't really have many critiques here to make about this book because I love it so much. The art is put together so well. The story, I really do love. I think that it's such an interesting thing. And also just the way, like, we haven't even gotten into fully, like, the whole thing with the curse on the blade and everything. There will be more of that going forward, but just, I need everybody to be reading this story because it's really just an entertaining story. And I mean, like I said, yeah, there's the whole gay thing, but that's really just for a page. And that's about as far as it goes. The rest of this is really just a straightforward, like, action story. So, I mean, it's very well done. And this is the type of thing that I'm saying whenever I'm telling other people who are in the same community as me, whenever I'm telling them, like, look, I get it. We all want these types of characters in the comics, but there's a way for them to be done. This is what I'm talking about. This is the type of stuff that I'm talking about. Stories that are actually interesting while also playing up, that kind of element. I don't mind seeing a heterosexual, like, sexual encounter, and I don't mind seeing a homosexual sexual encounter either. Just, there has to be an interesting story there and not just thrown in there to get someone's attention, as is so often done nowadays with so many comics. But that's not the case here. Like I said, like, here we actually get a very good, entertaining story in a world that already feels fleshed out and real, you know what I mean? Granted, there are monsters and everything, but you know what I mean by real. So I don't know if anybody out there has had the chance to read this book. I hope so. I hope you have picked it up, not just because I have been saying you should, but because you're genuinely interested in it. But if anybody has read it, do feel free to let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. And I mean, that's really all I have to say. So I mean, if you're done here, then go and read a book in celebration of National Read a Book Day. And if not, then I will see you on my next video.